Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing American Pop by Snowden Wright. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and then we'll finish up with what I'll be reading for next time. Looks like Snowden Wright has written a few other things. This came out in, I believe, 2019. I don't think it's his first novel because there's a previous credit that appears in the book itself, and I believe that is also a novel. Looks like Snowden Wright mostly has done magazine work. He also wrote, I believe, a detective novel after this, more of a noir novel set in Mississippi in the 80s. But this is 2019. There's some pretty famous names who have blurbed him in the cover. Joshua Ferris is someone I've reviewed in the past, who I think pretty highly of. But what the book is kind of a combination of a historical fiction and family drama rolled into one, and is about a family that owns a cola company similar to like a Coca-Cola called Panola Cola. Panola County is a county in Mississippi. So it's kind of what would happen if there was this family dynasty similar to the Kennedys, is kind of a touch point that he mentions in interviews, that has this like great dynastic fortune, and from roughly the late 1800s all the way to the late 1900s. Book ends around 1980, 86. It's kind of the rise and fall of this family, and it is a large cast of characters, and is told through the eyes of several different characters and these kind of historical events that the family kind of intersects with. There's a character who fights during the First World War. There's a character who experiences kind of Paris between the wars. So I thought that it was very wide in scope, which I appreciated. I think the book is very funny, laugh out loud funny in parts. The family has kind of a history of having a appreciation for word games and wordplay. And so that kind of is something that kind of is felt through the book that I enjoyed. I liked the fact that it's a very ambitious novel. It's a lot of characters that you're kind of juggling. I like that he has a family tree at the beginning of the book. That was very important to try to understand who all the characters were, to keep all straight what dates we were talking about, how old this character is at a certain point. I like the Easter eggs and the cameos of famous people throughout the book. Josephine Baker plays a pretty large part in the book, and it's not something like a Don DeLillo novel or Neil Stevenson does this as well, where he has kind of these historical cameos. So that happens a couple times. There's a blink and you'll miss it Frank O'Hara reference that I enjoyed. What other things did I like about the book? The book ends on something of a hopeful note, and I liked those things. I like the fictional company of Panola Cola. It felt like something of a real brand, and the brand history kind of mimics the history of other cola companies, and I thought that interaction was fun. I thought that the family itself and their feeling of tradition and things like that felt like a real family. So I enjoyed all those things. What didn't I enjoy? The book is very bleak and very depressing, and there's a lot of negative things that happen in the book. So if you're someone who doesn't want to read things like suicide and self-harm, there's a couple sexual assaults. There are possible incestuous relationships. There's a character who has a. It's not clear because this is set in the 1900s for most of the book. It's not clear exactly how you would describe his developmental issues. If he is, I read him as being low intelligence and also highly autistic, and so that character and how that character is handled, I could see some people being really put off by. There's a question of how much agency he has, and that kind of changes throughout the book. It's a long book, and the it's almost 400 pages, but it feels like both underdeveloped and overstuffed. Overstuffed because there's a lot of characters. You're talking about multi generations of characters, from the founders of this soda company to their parents to their children, and I think they have 4 children, to their relationships to some of their grandchildren. So it's just a large cast of characters, and because of that, you feel that you're kind of constantly going from one thing to the next. And some of that I think is to so the other half of that is the relationships with the characters between themselves don't always have a chance to fully gel into something deeper and more meaningful. And so there's surprisingly few interactions with the family members and themselves and each other because a lot of the book is them going off in the world and doing adventures and meeting other people outside of the family. And so oftentimes you're like, well, why does this character feel this way about this character? What does this character feel about this character? And a lot of that felt like strangely undercooked. The author does something really smart, and he sets the book at the beginning of the book. The first chapter is a party scene in New Year's Eve 1939. So moving from 1939 into 1940. And I think that chapter does a really good job of setting up who these characters are at that point in their life and what's important to them, and gives you just a glance of who this character is. I think that chapter is done really, really well. It kind of underscores that the family has places a lot of value on, some would say guile, other people would maybe say underhandedness, but that kind of flows throughout the book in some ways. And I think that the rest of the book being told out of sequence from a chronological standpoint, it's not clear to me if that juice is worth the squeeze, because you're constantly trying to go back and forth and understand, well, who is this character again? They were introduced back over here, but this is the nephew of this other character. And what do we know about them? Well, not very much. And so you're kind of trying to figure out all these things. It also does this thing where about by the halfway point in the novel, you kind of know the major beats of all the characters. And so the rest of the book is really just kind of filling in those beats. And I think one of the reasons that was done is in order to kind of preserve some mysteries in the book and to have this thing that you are going through and learning deeper, like mysteries. There's a mystery in the book of like, what is the secret ingredient of this cola? That is something that kind of recurs throughout the book. And I thought that some things like that were like there's a secret ingredient, which in the history of this book, the world of this book, is like one of the first viral marketing campaigns. So you have these like cola hunters who are trying to figure out what the secret ingredient is, and I thought that was kind of fun. And I think the very end of this book ties into the first chapter very nicely. But it also then the reason that you're reading this and you're like, well, why did he tell this out of sequence? And then you realize, well, if he told this in sequence, there are two characters that he really, really likes and cares about. There's a lot of side characters he doesn't really care about that much. And so if you told this in sequence, you would soon realize like there are huge gaps in the book if you were to tell them sequentially, and you'd be like, well, can we fill in some of these gaps? And I think if he had done that, it would have revealed some of the weaknesses of the novel a little bit more readily. And so I think that is why that didn't happen. But there are a lot of characters you're like, I wish we had gotten more in the interaction of these characters. I wish we had gotten more in the interaction of these other characters. But if we did, the book would have been like 600 pages long. And there's not a ton there that I would cut, but there's not also a ton that I found to be like extraordinary. Like it's written in a very like chock-a-block style. And so there's not a lot there to recommend it in terms of the prose. And there are some sections that felt a little long. The Ramsey is one of two fraternal twins in the family, and she has an affair with Josephine Baker. And the two of them in Paris, that scene went on a long time. And I think maybe there are scenes like that you could have cut. And then also just strangely, you never really feel like you fully know any of the characters, in part because you don't spend a lot of time with them, and the balance between talking about historical events and diving into their personal character, that balance sometimes feels off. Yeah, that's the book. I'm trying to think of anything else that I was bothered by. I guess there's some loose threads that kind of feel unwrapped up. Most of them are in the interactions with characters, and because they're large chunks of the book, chronologically speaking, that we don't cover as much, that's kind of left hanging. It's an interesting book. If you're someone who if you liked The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin, or The Corrections, or Commonwealth, this is kind of in the vein of those books. I think this is probably a little bit more ambitious than The Immortalists because there are more characters and you're kind of going back and forth in time. But in The Immortalists, I think that does a better job of getting to the root of the characters. And that book focuses on a relatively small number compared to this book, which is much larger in scope. And so this, I think, is much more interested in like the history, and that book is more interested in the characters. But if you like that book, you may also like this one. It is a family drama, so that's why I had the comparison of The Corrections and Commonwealth. I've never read The Thornbirds, but it sounds like it would be similar to The Thornbirds. but yeah, that's American Pop. I would say if you're interested in history and you kind of like multi-generational novels, this is quick enough. And I will say the one thing I didn't give it credit for, I read this in like 2.5 days. It is very strangely propulsive, and he does a very good job of kind of pushing you forward and giving you enough to keep you interested throughout the book. I was just left when I was done reading it with like, why did that character act that way? Does that make sense? Did that feel realistic? And because you are dealing with kind of a time in the past, you have to kind of sit and ask yourself the question of, well, what would the historical significance of this be then? Why is there not more to this? It just kind of seems like this is introduced super late, but then not dealt with later. And so there's a lot of questions in the book that you're like, why was that there? And yeah, it's not going to be a spoiler review because it would be a very, very long video, and I don't really want to do it on this book. There's also just the book is full of tropes, and I wish that some of the characters felt more developed and felt like more of their own people. A lot of the characters oftentimes feel like a branch of this family and less like their own person, and that is something kind of felt throughout the book. But if you enjoy those things, then I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's quick enough that you'll enjoy it. It's something of a fun ride. It is bleak. A lot of the characters have kind of these. There's a lot of death in the family. That's again, it's supposed to be something of a parallel to the Kennedys, and so you have this sense of like dread. One of the characters basically has something of, she calls it the malediction. It's a question of these characters who are they cursed, and that comes up in the book. Again, with the chronological order being like cut back and forth throughout the entire thing, I think that sense of doom is kind of lost because it's not set up as well in the beginning as you may like. And there may have been like emotional reasons for the emotional resonance of certain chapters and certain beats. Maybe that's one of the reasons he didn't want to do it that way. But it does lead to like a herky-jerky thing that I think is probably just going to turn off a lot of readers. And so that's another thing to note. You really have to be kind of similar to Commonwealth, be okay with moving back and forward through time and having a large cast of characters. I think the family tree really, really helped keep all those characters straight and keep their relationships straight for me to understand exactly who was who. But if I didn't have that, it would have been much, much harder. So I don't know how this would have worked on like ebook if you're reading this or an audiobook. So I would actually, for that reason, recommend the paperback because it's easier to kind of see. For me, at least, there are some people who internalize that stuff a lot cleaner and a lot easier than I do. But I liked having the family tree to references like, well, who is this person? How are they related to this other person? And then finally, as I mentioned before, there's some characters I think he really cares about, and there are other characters he just doesn't care about. The wife of one of the characters, especially, and their children too as well, he doesn't really care that much about. But and that kind of left again some of the undercooked aspect of the book. And I don't know how long this book would have been if all that stuff was brought back in. I don't know how interesting it would have been, but that was my overall feeling of it. I enjoyed it while I was reading it, and I think that there's enough funny moments to kind of get you through some of the bleakness, and the language and the jokes I thought were fun, and I thought the idea of this fictional company and their role in the world I thought was fun. But I like business books, and so that may or may not be to your no pun intended taste. So American Pop by Snowden Wright. Next time I'm going to be reading Trippy by Ernesto Londano. And until next time, if you've enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll leave a link below to my review for Immortalists and Commonwealth if you want to check those out. And I'll have the Twitter link below too if you want to follow me there. Until next time, bye.